Chapter 7. The memory hit Elena like a freight train at 3:47 a.m., triggered by the particular way Magnus smiled when she handed him his medication. A soft, fond expression that she suddenly remembered seeing 1,000 times before. "You worry too much, little wolf," he was saying, but he was 20 years younger, standing in a moonlit garden instead of lying in a hospital bed. "The pack loves you. They don't expect perfection. Don't they?" 20-year-old Ellie, wrapped her arms around herself, overwhelmed by the weight of everyone's expectations. "They expect me to be your perfect mate, the perfect Luna, the perfect mother to a dozen future pack babies. They expect me to know instinctively how to heal their emotional wounds and settle their disputes, and somehow keep everyone happy all the time." Magnus stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "They expect you to be yourself, Ellie. That's all I've ever expected. But what if I don't know who that is?" The words tumbled out of her, desperate and raw. "What if Eleanor Blackthorne is just this role I'm playing, and underneath I'm nobody special? What if I disappoint you? What if I disappoint everyone?" Magnus' eyes had gone soft with understanding, but also with something else, a possessive tenderness that made her feel simultaneously cherished and trapped. "You could never disappoint me, love. You're mine. You're perfect exactly as you are. Mine." That word, meant to comfort, had instead made panic claw at her throat. She was 20 years old, and everyone around her seemed so certain about who she was, what she wanted, what her future should look like. Everyone except her. Elena gasped, the memory dissolving as she found herself back in room 237, staring at Magnus with new eyes. The heart monitor beside his bed was beeping erratically, and his face had gone gray with pain. "Magnus!" She reached for his wrist, checking his pulse with professional efficiency, even as her world tilted off its axis. "Are you all right?" He tried to smile, but she could see the strain in his expression. "Just tired, love. All this remembering is exhausting." But Elena was remembering too now. The floodgates had opened, 32 years of suppressed memories rushing back in a torrent that left her breathless. She remembered pack runs through moonlit forests, remembered learning to hunt with Magnus' patient guidance, remembered the way the other wolves looked at her with respect and affection once they accepted her as their alpha's chosen mate. She also remembered the crushing weight of their expectations, the way every conversation seemed to revolve around her future role as Luna, her eventual children, her responsibility to hold the pack together through her bond with Magnus. "Elena!" Magnus' voice was weaker now, concerned. "You look pale. What's wrong?" What was wrong was that she remembered everything now, including the night she'd run away. The panic attack that had sent her fleeing into the storm, convinced that if she stayed one more day she'd lose herself completely in the role of Magnus Blackthorne's perfect mate. She'd been young, terrified, and completely overwhelmed. And instead of talking to Magnus about her fears, instead of asking for time or space or help, she'd taken the coward's way out and disappeared. "I remember," she whispered, the words falling into the quiet hospital room like stones into still water. Magnus went very still. "Remember what?" "Everything. The pack, the bonding ceremony, the night I left." Elena's voice cracked on the last word. "God, Magnus, I'm so sorry. I was such a coward." Magnus' hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with trembling desperation. "You were scared. You were 20 years old and dealing with more than anyone should have to handle." "I was selfish," Elena corrected, tears streaming down her face as more memories surfaced. "I was so worried about losing myself that I never stopped to think about what losing me would do to you. To the pack. I just ran." The heart monitor's beeping was getting more irregular. Magnus was breathing too fast, his skin taking on a grayish pallor that made Elena's nursing instincts scream warnings. "Magnus, you need to calm down. Your heart can't handle this kind of stress." 32 years, he whispered, his eyes locked on hers with desperate intensity. 32 years I convinced myself you'd been taken, that you'd never willingly leave the pack. "Leave me, Magnus." "I built this fantasy where you were held captive somewhere, where you were fighting to come home to us. Because the alternative, that you chose to leave, was too painful to accept." Elena watched in growing alarm as his vital signs continued to deteriorate. "Stop talking. Just breathe. Focus on breathing." But Magnus wasn't listening. 32 years of suppressed pain and hope and desperate love were pouring out of him in a torrent of words. "I searched everywhere. Hired every private investigator on the West Coast. Consulted psychics, followed up on every rumor, every possible sighting. I turned down 3 different women who could have been perfect mates because I was convinced you were coming home. Magnus, please. I kept your room exactly the way you left it. Your clothes, your books, that ridiculous collection of ceramic horses you loved so much. I couldn't let go. I couldn't move on. I couldn't. The heart monitor flatlined. Elena's training kicked in instantly, muscle memory overriding the emotional chaos in her head. She hit the code blue button, calling for the crash team while simultaneously checking Magnus' airway and positioning her hands for chest compressions. Come on, she muttered, beginning CPR with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Don't you dare die on me now, you stubborn, dramatic, impossible man. The room filled with medical personnel, doctors, nurses, technicians with equipment she couldn't even name. But Elena didn't move from Magnus' bedside, didn't stop the rhythmic compressions that were keeping his heart beating artificially. I've got this, Dr. Patterson said, trying to guide her away from the bed. No. Elena's voice was steel wrapped in desperation. I'm staying. And she did stay, even when the crash team took over, even when they shocked his heart back into rhythm, even when his vital signs stabilized and the immediate crisis passed. She stayed, holding his limp hand and whispering things she should have said 32 years ago. I loved you, she said to his unconscious form, tears dripping onto their joined hands. I loved you so much it terrified me. You were this powerful, confident alpha, and I was just a scared kid who didn't know how to be worthy of that kind of devotion. Dr. Patterson and the other medical staff had quietly withdrawn, giving her privacy for what they clearly assumed might be her final goodbye. I thought if I stayed, I'd disappear completely into being your mate, your Luna. I'd become just an extension of you instead of my own person. Elena's voice broke on a sob. But running away didn't make me more myself. It just made me half a person for 32 years. Magnus' chest rose and fell steadily under her hand, but he remained unconscious. I should have talked to you. Should have told you I needed time, needed space to figure out who Eleanor Blackthorne was when she wasn't trying to live up to everyone else's expectations. But I was 20 and stupid, and I thought the only choice was all or nothing. She leaned closer, her lips almost brushing his ear. I never stopped loving you. Even when I forgot everything else, even when I didn't remember your name or your face, part of me was always looking for you. Always felt like something was missing. The door to the room opened quietly, and Elena looked up to see Caleb and Lydia entering, followed by what appeared to be the entire pack she'd met yesterday. 30 pairs of eyes watched her with a mixture of grief, hope, and barely contained emotion. How is he? Caleb asked quietly. Stable, Elena replied, her voice hoarse from crying. But he coded. His heart stopped for almost 3 minutes. A collective sound of anguish went up from the pack, several of the younger wolves actually whimpering with distress. Elena found herself automatically shifting into comfort mode, the same way she would with worried family members in the ICU. He's going to be okay, she assured them, her voice taking on the calm, professional tone she used to deliver difficult news. His heart rhythm is regular now, and his other vitals are stabilizing. He just needs rest. Luna, the red-haired wolf from yesterday, Thomas, she suddenly remembered, spoke up hesitantly. We heard. That is, the doctor said you performed CPR? For almost 10 minutes, Elena confirmed, until the crash team could get his heart started again. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. You saved him. I did my job, Elena said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. She hadn't saved Magnus as a nurse doing her job. She'd saved him as a woman desperately trying to keep the love of her life from slipping away before she could tell him the truth. We heard what you said, Lydia said quietly. About loving him. About why you left. Elena felt heat creep up her neck. In the chaos of the medical emergency, she'd forgotten that werewolves had enhanced hearing. Her very private, very emotional confession had been witnessed by 30 supernatural eavesdroppers. I'm sorry you had to hear that, she said, embarrassed. I know it's complicated. It's not complicated at all, said the blonde wolf, Eric, her memory supplied. You love him. He loves you. The rest is just details. The rest is 32 years of pain and abandonment issues, Elena pointed out. Which can be worked through, Thomas added hopefully. If you're willing to try. Elena looked around the room at all the hopeful faces, then down at Magnus, who remained stubbornly unconscious despite the fact that his vital signs suggested he should be waking up soon. I don't know if I can be the Luna you remember, she said honestly. I'm not 20 anymore. I've been human for half my life. I have responsibilities, a job, a daughter to think about. You have a daughter? Lydia interrupted, looking startled. Adopted, Elena clarified quickly. She's 19 now in college. But she's still my responsibility. Then she's packed too, Eric said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Family is family, Luna. Blood or not. Elena felt that strange warmth in her chest again, the sense of belonging she'd been running from for 32 years. These people, this pack, they weren't trying to trap her or control her. They were just trying to welcome her home. Magnus? She said softly, squeezing his hand. I know you can hear me. The doctors said your brain activity is normal, and your vitals are too good for someone who's completely unconscious. Magnus didn't respond, but Elena was almost certain she felt his fingers twitch slightly. I also know you well enough to know you're probably milking this for dramatic effect, she continued, and several pack members snorted with poorly suppressed laughter. So whenever you're ready to stop pretending to be dying, we have some things to discuss. Still no response, but Elena was now absolutely certain Magnus was awake and listening. It was exactly the kind of thing he would do, fake being unconscious so he could hear what people really thought about him. Fine, Elena said, settling back in her chair. I'll wait, but I'm not going anywhere, Magnus. I ran away once, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. I'm not running again. Behind her, she heard Thomas whisper to Eric. Should we tell her the Alpha's been awake for the last 5 minutes? Absolutely not, Eric whispered back. He's finally getting the confession he's been waiting 32 years to hear. Elena bit back a smile. Some things apparently never changed. The pack was still terrible at whispering, Magnus was still dramatic, and she was still hopelessly, completely, utterly in love with the most impossible man she'd ever met. The only difference was that now, finally, she was ready to admit it. Chapter 8. Magnus Blackthorne had been unconscious for exactly 17 minutes when Elena finally lost her patience. Okay, you can stop the act now, she announced, standing up and crossing her arms while 30 pack members tried to look innocent. Your breathing pattern changed 12 minutes ago, your heart rate has been steadily improving, and you just squeezed my hand when I mentioned keeping my job. Also, Eric over there has the worst poker face in werewolf history. The blonde wolf in question turned bright red and suddenly found the ceiling tiles fascinating. Magnus cracked one eye open, then the other, looking for all the world like a man who'd just awakened from the depths of unconsciousness rather than someone who'd been eavesdropping on emotional confessions. Elena, he said weakly, putting just enough rasp in his voice to sound convincing. What happened? The last thing I remember is me performing CPR while confessing my undying love, Elena interrupted dryly. Which you heard every word of, you manipulative, dramatic, impossible man. Magnus had the grace to look slightly sheepish. I may have regained consciousness sooner than I initially indicated. And how much sooner would that be? From the moment you started chest compressions, Caleb supplied helpfully, earning a murderous glare from his alpha. Traitor, Magnus muttered. Elena stared at him, torn between relief that he was alive, fury that he'd manipulated her, and grudging admiration for his audacity. You faked a cardiac arrest to get me to confess my feelings? I didn't fake anything, Magnus protested, struggling to sit up. My heart genuinely stopped. I just may have recovered more quickly than expected and chosen not to immediately announce my improved condition. Because you wanted to hear what I'd say when I thought you were dying. Magnus had the decency to look slightly ashamed. Yes. Elena looked around the room at 30 grown werewolves who were all suddenly very interested in their shoes. And all of you just went along with this? We were respecting our alpha's wishes, Thomas said diplomatically. You were all eavesdropping like a bunch of gossipy teenagers, Elena corrected. Which, by the way, we're going to talk about later. But first, she turned back to Magnus, her expression serious. We need to discuss some things. All of us. Right now. Magnus' hopeful expression faltered slightly. Elena. No, don't Elena me. I remember everything, Magnus. Everything. Including why I left, what I was running from, and exactly how suffocating pack life felt when I was 20 years old. The room went dead silent. Elena could practically feel the tension radiating from every pack member as they waited to see if their Luna was about to bolt again. I also remember, Elena continued, that I was young and scared and handled the situation in the worst possible way. I should have talked to you instead of running. Should have explained what I was feeling instead of just disappearing with a letter. Magnus reached for her hand, hope flickering in his eyes. We can start over. We can. We can try, Elena interrupted. But not the way we did before. I'm not 20 anymore, Magnus. I'm 50 years old, I've built a life I like, and I'm not about to throw it away again because of some mystical mate bond. Of course not, Magnus said quickly. Whatever you want, whatever you need. What I need, Elena said firmly, is for you to stop agreeing to everything before you know what I'm asking for. We need to discuss this like adults, not like a desperate alpha and his long-lost omega. Magnus blinked, clearly thrown by her directness. All right, what are your terms? Elena almost smiled at the phrasing. Trust Magnus to turn relationship negotiations into business discussions. First, no pack politics. I'm not interested in being Luna to 90 werewolves. I'll be friendly, I'll be supportive, but I'm not going to mediate disputes or organize pack functions or whatever else Luna duties involve. But, Thomas started. No buts, Elena cut him off. I spent 15 years building a career as a nurse. I like helping people, but I like helping them medically, not politically. Magnus nodded slowly. What else? No claiming ceremonies, no formal mating bonds, no mystical rituals that tie my soul to yours for eternity, Elena continued. If we're going to try this relationship, we're going to build it like normal people. Dating, spending time together, learning who we are now instead of trying to recapture who we were 32 years ago. Several pack members made sounds of distress at this, but Magnus held up a hand to silence them. Agreed. What else? I'm keeping my job, Elena said firmly. I like being a nurse. I'm good at it. And I'm not giving up my independence for anyone, even someone I love. I would never ask you to. Wouldn't you? Elena raised an eyebrow. Because 32 years ago, you absolutely would have expected me to give up everything to be your perfect mate. How do I know that's changed? Magnus was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. You don't. You'll just have to trust that I've learned from losing you once. And you'll have to trust that I've learned from running away, Elena replied. Which brings me to my next point. If this doesn't work out, if we try and it becomes clear we're not compatible anymore, I need your word that you won't spend another 30 years searching for me when I walk away. The words hit Magnus like a physical blow. Elena could see him flinch, see the pain that flashed across his features. Elena! Promise me, Magnus. Promise me that if I leave again, you'll let me go. You'll move on, find someone else, build a life that doesn't revolve around a woman who may never come back. Magnus closed his eyes, clearly struggling with the request. I can't promise that. Then we don't have a deal, Elena said, reaching for her purse. Wait! Magnus' eyes flew open, panic evident in his voice. I mean, I can promise to try. I can promise that if you leave again, I'll make an effort to move on. But Elena, asking me to promise I'll stop loving you is like asking me to promise to stop breathing. Despite herself, Elena felt her heart soften at the raw honesty in his voice. I'm not asking you to stop loving me. I'm asking you to love me enough to let me go if I can't be what you need. You're what I need, Magnus said simply. Exactly as you are. Stubborn, independent, completely unwilling to let me get away with dramatic nonsense. You're what I need, Elena. Not Eleanor, not some idealized memory of a 20-year-old Omega. You. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. How can you be sure? You've been in love with a memory for 32 years. How do you know you're not just projecting that onto me? Because, Magnus said with a smile that was both tender and exasperated, the Eleanor I remembered was sweet and biddable and never would have thrown a bedpan at my head. You're fierce and argumentative and absolutely terrifying when you're angry. And I love you more than I ever loved her. Elena stared at him, processing the words. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or a completely backhanded compliment. With Magnus, it's usually both, Lydia said dryly from the corner where she'd been silently observing the entire negotiation. Shut up, Lydia, Magnus and Elena said in unison, then looked at each other in surprise. See, Magnus said with a grin. We're already finishing each other's sentences. Elena couldn't help but smile back. Fine, we can try this. But I have more conditions. Magnus' grin widened. I wouldn't expect anything less. What else? I want to go on actual dates. Movies, dinner, normal couple stuff. No running through the forest naked under the full moon until I'm ready for that level of supernatural weirdness. Done. Though I reserve the right to eventually convince you that running through the forest naked is the best date night activity ever invented. We'll see, Elena said, then continued. I also want you to see a therapist. The pack made collective sounds of surprise, but Magnus just nodded. That's probably not a bad idea. 32 years of obsessive behavior has likely left me with some issues to work through. And I want to keep my apartment, Elena added. Even if things work out between us, even if I eventually move in with you, I'm keeping my place as a backup plan. Magnus' expression flickered with hurt, but he nodded. If that's what you need to feel secure. It is. Elena looked around the room at all the expectant faces. And finally, I want all of you to understand that this is between Magnus and me. No pack pressure, no expectations, no helpful suggestions about when we should mate or bond or have little werewolf babies. We're two adults figuring out a relationship, not a breeding pair for your entertainment. But Luna, Thomas started. Elena, she corrected firmly. Just Elena. I'm not your Luna until and unless I decide to be, which may never happen. Thomas looked like she'd just crushed his dreams, but he nodded reluctantly. Elena turned back to Magnus. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. Magnus studied her face for a long moment, then smiled, not the desperate, hopeful expression he'd been wearing, but something warmer and more genuine. You know what? I'll take them. All of them. Even the therapy, which terrifies me more than that time I fought a grizzly bear with my bare hands. You fought a grizzly bear? Elena asked, momentarily distracted. It was the 80s. I was young and stupid and showing off for a female who turned out to be completely unimpressed by displays of masculine stupidity. Smart woman, Elena said. The smartest, Magnus agreed. She married an accountant from Portland and has been happily human ever since. Elena felt a strange pang at that. Not jealousy, exactly, but something like recognition. Do you regret that? Losing someone else because of supernatural complications. Magnus was quiet for a moment. I regret that she felt she had to choose between love and the life she wanted. But I don't regret waiting for you, Elena. Even if this doesn't work out, even if we try and fail spectacularly, I don't regret the choice I made to wait. Elena felt something settle in her chest, some tension she'd been carrying since her memories returned. Okay then. I guess we're doing this. We're doing this, Magnus confirmed, then hesitated. Does this mean I can hold your hand now? Because I've been wanting to hold your hand properly for days, and the fake relationship thing was not nearly as satisfying as I'd hoped. Elena laughed, a sound that seemed to lift the entire pack's spirits. You can hold my hand, but no claiming bites, no scent marking, and definitely no public displays of possession. What about private displays of possession? Magnus asked hopefully. We'll see how the first few dates go, Elena said, but she was smiling as she said it. Magnus took her hand in both of his thumbs stroking across her knuckles with reverent care. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving us another chance, for not running again, for being brave enough to stay and fight instead of disappearing into the night. Thank you for being patient enough to wait, Elena replied, and for not actually dying before I could tell you I love you. I would never be so inconsiderate, Magnus said solemnly, then ruined the effect by adding, though I reserve the right to use fake medical emergencies to get emotional confessions in the future. You absolutely do not have that right, Elena said, but she was laughing as she said it. Around them, the pack was slowly relaxing, smiles breaking out across faces that had been tense with worry. Elena could see hope blooming in their expressions, the kind of hope that came from seeing their alpha genuinely happy for the first time in decades. So, Caleb said carefully, does this mean you'll be coming to pack functions? Because we have a barbecue planned for next weekend, and everyone's been wanting to meet you properly. Elena looked at Magnus, who was trying very hard to look like he didn't care about her answer. I suppose I could make an appearance. As long as everyone understands I'm coming as Magnus' girlfriend, not as Luna. Girlfriend, Magnus repeated, testing the word. I like that. It sounds so normal. We are going to be as normal as possible, Elena confirmed. Which reminds me. She turned to address the pack as a whole. I need all of you to understand that I've been human for 15 years. I don't remember most werewolf customs. I'm probably going to make social mistakes, and I'm definitely going to need time to adjust. Please be patient with me. Of course, Luna, Elena, Eric corrected quickly. Whatever you need. What I need, Elena said, is for all of you to go home and let Magnus rest. He just had a cardiac event, and despite his miraculous recovery, he needs sleep. She's right, Dr. Patterson said from the doorway, where he'd been lurking with obvious interest in the supernatural soap opera playing out in his cardiac unit. Mr. Blackthorne needs rest, and this room is well over capacity for visitors. The pack began filing out, but not before each member stopped to nod respectfully to both Magnus and Elena. It was clearly some kind of ritual acknowledgement, and Elena found herself nodding back automatically. When they were finally alone, Magnus squeezed her hand. So, How do you feel about dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere public, completely normal, with menus and everything. I'd like that, Elena said. As long as you promise not to order your steak raw or howl at the waitstaff. I make no promises about the steak, Magnus said, but I'll try to keep the howling to a minimum. Elena settled back in her chair, still holding Magnus' hand, and marveled at how right this felt. Not the desperate, overwhelming intensity of her memories from 32 years ago, but something steadier, more mature, built on choice rather than destiny. Magnus, she said softly. Yes. I'm still scared. About all of this. About what it means to be part of a pack again, about whether we can really make this work. Magnus brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I'm scared too. Terrified, actually. But Elena. Yeah. I'd rather be terrified with you than comfortable without you. Elena smiled, feeling something that had been broken inside her for 32 years finally start to heal. Me too. 6 months later, Elena Santos Blackthorne, she was still working on the name situation, stood in the doorway of Magnus' study, watching him frown at his laptop screen with the intense concentration of a man trying to defuse a bomb. Let me guess, she said. You're trying to figure out how to send a text message again. Magnus looked up with the expression of someone who'd been caught red-handed. The symbols are confusing. Why are there so many little pictures? What does the crying, laughing face mean? Is someone upset or amused? Elena walked over and perched on the arm of his chair, looking at his phone. You sent Caleb 17 crying, laughing emojis in response to his quarterly financial report. I meant to send a thumbs up. I know you did. Elena kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent that had become synonymous with home. What are you trying to say to me? That I miss you and hope your shift is going well, and that Mrs. Henderson in room 314 isn't giving you too much trouble about her medications. Elena smiled. Mrs. Henderson is fine. I convinced her that taking her pills was a form of rebellion against aging. She's been model patient ever since. Magnus typed carefully, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Elena's phone buzzed a moment later with a message that read, Miss you. Hope shift good. Mrs. Henderson okay? Love you. Also there is a surprise waiting at home. A surprise? Elena asked, raising an eyebrow. Magnus tried to look innocent and failed completely. A small surprise. Nothing dramatic. Elena had learned to be suspicious of Magnus' definition of nothing dramatic. Last month's small surprise had been a fully equipped home gym because he was worried about her pulling her back during patient transfers. The month before that, it had been a new car because her old one had made a noise he deemed concerning. What kind of surprise? She asked. The good kind. The kind that makes you happy instead of throwing medical equipment at my head. Elena's phone buzzed again. This time the message was just a string of heart emojis, followed by what appeared to be a random selection of symbols. I was trying to spell surprise, but I think I hit the wrong buttons, Magnus said sheepishly. Elena laughed, the sound filling the warm study. I love you, you technologically challenged disaster of a man. Enough to marry me? Magnus asked hopefully. It was the same question he asked every week, usually on Friday nights when Elena was tired from work and most likely to be charmed into submission by his ridiculous romantic gestures. Ask me next week, Elena replied, the same answer she gave every time. Magnus grinned, clearly delighted by their weekly ritual. I will. Same time next Friday. Same time next Friday, Elena confirmed. Now tell me about this surprise. I may have made a small donation to the hospital, Magnus said carefully. Elena's eyes narrowed. How small? Small enough that they're naming the new cardiac wing after you. Elena stared at him. Magnus Blackthorne, please tell me you did not donate an entire cardiac wing to the hospital just because we're dating. I didn't donate it because we're dating, Magnus protested. I donated it because you're the best nurse they have, and they don't pay you nearly enough. Also, I may have been making anonymous donations to nursing scholarship programs for the past 30 years. Elena's mouth fell open. 30 years? Magnus, That's how long I've known that the world needs more people like you, he said simply. People who take care of others, who fight for their patients, who see healing as a calling instead of just a job. I couldn't take care of you the way I wanted to, but I could help train others to take care of people the way you do. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. You've been secretly funding nursing education for 3 decades. Also medical research, hospital equipment upgrades, and a program that provides financial assistance to healthcare workers with student loan debt, Magnus admitted. Caleb handles the details. I just signed the checks. Elena shook her head, overwhelmed by the scope of his quiet generosity. How many people have you helped? A few hundred, maybe? I don't keep track. The point was never recognition. It was just, if I couldn't have the best nurse in the world taking care of me, at least I could help create more nurses who might be half as good as you. Elena slid off the chair arm and into Magnus' lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. You impossible, wonderful, ridiculously romantic man. Is this the kind of surprise that gets you to say yes when I propose next week? Magnus asked hopefully. Ask me next week and find out, Elena said, but she was smiling as she kissed him. Outside, she could hear the sounds of pack members arriving for their weekly family dinner. A tradition she'd accidentally started by mentioning that she missed cooking for people. Now every Friday night, their house filled with werewolves who came for the food and stayed to tell Elena about their problems, relationship issues, and various supernatural drama. She'd become their unofficial therapist without meaning to, dispensing advice and tissues in equal measure, while Magnus watched with fond amusement and occasionally muttered about his mate being too good for any of them. The pack's arriving, Magnus noted, nuzzling her neck. Thomas texted earlier, something about needing relationship advice because his mate thinks he's been working too much. And Eric's bringing his new girlfriend, Elena added. The human one he's afraid to tell about the werewolf thing. And Lydia's coming with her latest disaster of a boyfriend, Magnus sighed. The one who thinks he's an influencer. Elena laughed. I love our weird life. Even the parts where 30 werewolves show up every week to eat all our food and cry about their feelings. Especially those parts, Elena confirmed. Though I draw the line at couples counseling. I'm not qualified for that level of supernatural relationship drama. Magnus' arms tightened around her. You're qualified for anything you want to be qualified for. You're extraordinary, Elena Santos. In this life and the one you lived before. Elena kissed him softly, tasting 32 years of missed opportunities and second chances and the promise of whatever came next. Ask me again next week, she whispered against his lips. Magnus smiled, the expression full of love and patience and absolute certainty. I will. Every week for the rest of our lives, if that's what it takes. That's exactly what it'll take, Elena said. Because I'm not going anywhere, Magnus Blackthorne. Not ever again. And for the first time in 32 years, Magnus Blackthorne felt like the luckiest alpha alive. Chapter 9. Elena Santos was halfway through reorganizing Magnus' ridiculously complicated medication schedule when her daughter walked into the kitchen, carrying a box of old photographs, and wearing the expression that usually preceded difficult conversations. Mom, Sarah said, setting the box on the counter with more force than necessary. We need to talk. Elena looked up from the pill organizer she'd been labeling with military precision, taking in her daughter's tense posture and the way she was avoiding eye contact. At 19, Sarah had inherited her mother's no-nonsense attitude and her father's, whoever he was, sharp cheekbones and stubborn chin. What's wrong, sweetheart? Elena asked, automatically shifting into problem-solving mode. Did something happen at school? Are you having trouble with your classes? I'm having trouble with the fact that my mother has apparently been living a lie for my entire life, Sarah said, dumping the contents of the box onto the kitchen counter. Elena's blood went cold as she recognized the photographs scattered across the granite surface. Pictures of a young woman who looked exactly like her, standing next to a man who was unmistakably a younger version of Magnus Blackthorne. There were dozens of them. Eleanor and Magnus at what appeared to be formal pack gatherings. Eleanor laughing while surrounded by people Elena now recognized as pack members. Eleanor in a wedding dress that took Elena's breath away. Where did you get these? Elena whispered. Lydia gave them to me, Sarah said, crossing her arms. She thought I deserved to know the truth about my mother's past. Especially since I'm apparently about to gain a stepfather who's been in love with her since before I was born. Elena sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Sarah, I can explain. Can you? Because I've spent the last 3 hours looking at pictures of you living a completely different life, and I'm starting to wonder if Elena Santos actually exists or if she's just another character you've been playing. The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. You are the most real thing in my life, Sarah. Everything I've done for the past 19 years has been about giving you the best life I could. As Elena Santos, the single mother who works double shifts to make ends meet, Sarah said, her voice tight with hurt. Not as Eleanor Blackthorne, the werewolf heiress who ran away from a billionaire who was apparently willing to take care of both of us. Elena closed her eyes, trying to figure out where to start. The truth was complicated, tangled up with supernatural politics and memory loss and decisions she'd made when Sarah was barely more than a baby. "Sit down," Elena said finally. "Please, let me tell you the whole story." Sarah remained standing, but some of the rigid anger went out of her posture. "The woman in those pictures is me," Elena began. "But she's also not me. When I left Magnus 32 years ago, I was Eleanor Blackthorne. But the woman who found you 18 years ago, the woman who adopted you and raised you and loved you more than life itself, that's Elena Santos." "Found me?" Sarah's voice was carefully controlled. "You didn't give birth to me?" "No, sweetheart. I found you abandoned outside a hospital in Portland when you were 6 months old. You were sick, malnourished, and had been left with nothing but a note saying your mother couldn't take care of you." Sarah sat down hard, the fight going out of her. "I'm adopted." "You're my daughter," Elena said fiercely. "In every way that matters, you are my daughter. The fact that I didn't give birth to you doesn't change that." Magnus appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of raised voices. He took in the scattered photographs and Sarah's stricken expression with the quick assessment of someone used to managing pack crises. "Should I leave you two alone?" he asked quietly. "No," Elena said, surprising herself. "Stay. You're part of this story too." Magnus moved to stand behind Elena's chair, his hand settling on her shoulder in a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. "After I left the pack," Elena continued, "I was lost. I had some money I'd taken from my trust fund, but I didn't know how to be human. I didn't know how to live in the regular world without the pack structure I'd grown up in." She paused, remembering those first terrifying months of freedom. "I ended up in Portland because it was far enough from Seattle that I felt safe, but close enough to the forests that my wolf didn't feel completely trapped. I got a job as a waitress, rented a tiny apartment, and tried to figure out who I was when I wasn't defined by being Magnus' mate. But something went wrong," Magnus said quietly. "The transformation trauma from your teens, the stress of leaving the pack, the isolation, it all caught up with you." Elena nodded. "I started having seizures, episodes where I'd lose time, wake up in strange places with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong, couldn't find any physical cause. Magical trauma," Magnus explained to Sarah, who was listening with wide eyes. "When werewolves are separated from their pack for extended periods, especially wolves who experience transformation trauma, it can cause a form of supernatural amnesia. The mind starts compartmentalizing memories to protect itself from the pain of isolation. So I was slowly losing myself," Elena continued, "losing Eleanor piece by piece. And then one night, during one of my episodes, I found you." She looked at Sarah, remembering that night with perfect clarity. "You were so small, so sick. The note with you said your mother was 17 and couldn't take care of a baby, but there was something else. Something about you that called to my wolf instincts." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. Elena exchanged a look with Magnus, who nodded encouragingly. "You smelled like pack, Sarah. Faintly, but definitely. Your mother was Werewolf, probably from a broken pack or a lone wolf family." Sarah's mouth fell open. "Are you saying I'm—" "We don't know for sure," Elena said quickly. "You've never shown signs of shifting, never demonstrated enhanced senses or healing. But there's definitely supernatural heritage in your bloodline. That's why you were drawn to her," Magnus said softly. "Your wolf recognized another wolf pup in need." Elena nodded. "I took you to the hospital, told them I'd found you abandoned. When child services started asking questions about placement, something inside me just snapped into place. I couldn't let them put you in the system. You were mine to protect. So you adopted me." "So I became Elena Santos," Elena corrected. "The authorities needed a stable identity for someone looking to adopt. I couldn't use Eleanor Blackthorne. That identity was connected to a missing person case, supernatural politics, and a world I was trying to escape." Magnus frowned. "How did you create a new identity?" Elena's cheeks flushed slightly. "I may have had help. There's a network of supernatural beings who assist others in disappearing when necessary. Witches, mostly, who specialize in paperwork magic." "Paperwork magic?" Sarah asked weakly. "Don't ask," Elena and Magnus said simultaneously. Sarah stared at them both for a moment, then started laughing. It wasn't entirely hysterical laughter, which Elena took as a good sign. "So let me get this straight," Sarah said between giggles. "My adoptive mother is a runaway werewolf heiress who used magical bureaucracy to fake her own identity so she could adopt a potentially supernatural baby she found abandoned outside a hospital." "That's an accurate summary," Elena admitted. And now she's dating the billionaire werewolf alpha she ran away from 32 years ago, who has been secretly funding nursing education the entire time she's been working as a nurse. Also accurate. Sarah looked at Magnus. And you didn't know any of this? You didn't know she'd adopted a daughter, or that she was working at the same hospital where you'd eventually be treated? Magnus shifted uncomfortably. I knew Elena Santos worked at the hospital. I've been funding it for years, and I make it a point to know the staff. I just didn't make the connection. Because Elena Santos had black hair instead of Eleanor's brown, wore colored contacts to hide her amber eyes, and had gained enough weight that her facial structure looked different, Elena added. Plus, I was careful to work nights when most of the administrative staff wasn't around. I didn't want to risk being recognized. But you were hiding in plain sight, Sarah mused. Working at a hospital you knew Magnus supported, using skills that your werewolf healing abilities made you exceptional at. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. I think part of me always hoped he'd find me. Even when I was too scared to go back on my own, even when I convinced myself I was better off as Elena Santos, there was always this tiny part of me that hoped someday he'd walk through those hospital doors. Magnus' hand tightened on her shoulder. And when I did, you threw a bedpan at my head. You deserved it, Elena said, but she was smiling through her tears. Sarah looked between them, her expression thoughtful. So what happens now? Do I get to keep being Sarah Santos, or do I suddenly become Sarah Blackthorne? Do I have to learn werewolf etiquette and pack politics? You get to be whoever you want to be, Elena said firmly. If you want to be part of the pack, they'll welcome you with open arms. If you want to stay human and go to college and pretend none of this supernatural nonsense exists, that's fine too. And if I want to be somewhere in between, Magnus spoke up for the first time in several minutes. Then you'll fit right in. Half the pack is somewhere in between human and wolf, trying to figure out how to live in both worlds. Sarah picked up one of the photographs, a picture of young Eleanor laughing at something off camera while Magnus looked at her with unmistakable adoration. You really loved each other, didn't you? Even back then. We did, Elena said softly. But we were also young and stubborn and terrible at communicating. Some things don't change, Magnus muttered, earning himself an elbow to the ribs. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the pictures scattered across the counter. When she finally looked up, her expression was determined. I want to know, she said. I want to know about the pack, about werewolf culture, about my possible heritage. I want to understand the world I might have grown up in if things had been different. Elena felt relief flood through her. Are you sure? It's a lot to process, and once you know the truth about the supernatural world, you can't unknow it. Mom, Sarah said, using the tone that brooked no argument. You've spent 19 years protecting me from the truth about yourself. Don't you think I deserve the chance to decide for myself what I can handle? Elena looked at her daughter, brilliant, strong, stubborn Sarah, who had somehow grown into an amazing young woman despite being raised by a werewolf having an identity crisis, and felt a surge of pride so fierce it nearly knocked her over. You're right, Elena said. You deserve the truth. All of it. Good. Now, can someone please explain why there are 30 werewolves in expensive suits crying in our living room? Elena and Magnus exchanged confused looks, then hurried toward the front of the house. Sure enough, the entire pack was assembled in their living room, looking like they were attending a funeral. What's wrong? Elena asked, immediately shifting into crisis management mode. Thomas looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Caleb told us about Sarah, about how you had to create a false identity to protect her. About how you've been hiding from us for 18 years because you were afraid we wouldn't accept a human child. Elena's mouth fell open. That's not. We failed you, Eric interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. We failed you as a pack. You should have been able to come to us when you found her. You should have known we'd help you, support you, welcome any child you chose to love. But instead, Thomas continued, you were so scared of pack politics and expectations that you felt safer creating an entirely new identity rather than trusting us with the truth. Elena looked around the room at 30 supernatural beings who were genuinely devastated by the realization that she'd felt the need to hide from them. Guys, it wasn't about not trusting you. It was about not trusting us, Magnus said quietly. Elena left because she felt suffocated by our expectations. She stayed away because she was afraid we'd do the same thing to Sarah. And we would have, wouldn't we? We would have immediately started speculating about Sarah's heritage, testing her for supernatural abilities, trying to fit her into pack hierarchy. The silence that followed was damning in its completeness. So what do we do now? Lydia asked from her position by the window. How do we make this right? Sarah stepped into the living room, surveying the assembled werewolves with the clinical assessment she'd inherited from her mother. You could start by not making this about yourselves, she said calmly. This isn't about your guilt or your failures. This is about a woman who made the best choices she could with the information she had at the time. 30 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the 19-year-old human who had just put them all in their place with the efficiency of a seasoned diplomat. Sarah's right, Elena said, moving to stand beside her daughter. I don't need apologies or guilt or dramatic declarations of unworthiness. What I need is for all of you to understand that family pack isn't about blood or species or supernatural abilities. It's about choosing to love and support each other, even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated, Magnus added, moving to Elena's other side. Elena looked around the room at the faces of people who had become her chosen family, then at Magnus, who had never stopped believing she'd come home, and finally at Sarah, who was handling supernatural revelations with the grace of someone twice her age. So, she said, addressing the pack as a whole, if you want to make things right, here's how you do it. You accept that Sarah is my daughter and therefore pack family, regardless of her species or supernatural abilities. You respect her choice to be as involved or uninvolved in pack life as she wants. And you stop treating me like a fragile Luna who needs to be protected from difficult decisions. And, Sarah added, someone needs to explain to me why werewolf health insurance is apparently a legitimate concern, because I'm pre-med and genuinely curious about supernatural healthcare systems. The laughter that followed broke the tension, and Elena felt something that had been knotted in her chest for 18 years finally relax. She was Elena Santos, registered nurse and single mother. She was Eleanor Blackthorne, runaway Omega and Pack Luna. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have to choose between them. She could be both. Epilogue, 2 years later. Elena Blackthorne, she'd finally settled on the hyphenated version after Magnus' 100th marriage proposal, stood in the doorway of the newly completed community center, watching chaos unfold with the fond exasperation of someone who'd learned that werewolf pack gatherings were only marginally more organized than kindergarten field trips. Mom! Sarah called from across the room, where she was attempting to wrangle 3 werewolf toddlers who had apparently discovered they could partially shift just their hands and were now climbing the walls. Literally. A little help here? Use the spray bottle, Elena called back, pointing to the labeled bottle on the craft table. Light mist, nothing harmful. It's mostly water with a tiny bit of citrus oil. They hate the smell. Sarah grabbed the bottle and gave the wall-climbing toddlers a gentle spritz. They immediately dropped to the floor with indignant squeaks and scampered back to their mothers, who looked torn between mortification and pride. Where did you get werewolf child-wrangling techniques? Asked Dr. Jennifer Martinez. The human pediatrician Elena had somehow convinced to volunteer at the pack's monthly health screenings. She was one of 3 human medical professionals who now knew about the supernatural community and had been sworn to secrecy with a combination of legal documents and really good coffee. Trial, error, and a lot of research into animal behavior, Elena replied. Turns out werewolf toddlers have more in common with regular wolf pups than anyone wants to admit. The community center was the result of 18 months of planning, fundraising, and Magnus' tendency to solve problems by throwing money at them until they went away. What had started as Elena's suggestion for a neutral space where pack members could gather without overwhelming Magnus' house had evolved into a full-service community center that served both the supernatural community and regular humans from the surrounding neighborhoods. The main room hosted everything from pack meetings to yoga classes to Sarah's pre-med study groups. The medical wing where Elena was currently stationed had exam rooms staffed by supernatural-friendly healthcare providers, a children's area designed to accommodate young werewolves in various states of transformation, and a counseling center where Elena had accidentally become the pack's official therapist. Elena, called Thomas from the sign-in desk, we've got a situation. Elena looked over to see a nervous-looking young woman clutching a baby who was emitting a soft, otherworldly glow. The mother appeared to be human, but the baby was clearly something else entirely. First-time supernatural parent? Elena asked, already moving toward them with the calm efficiency she'd perfected over 2 years of dealing with cross-species family dynamics. Half Fae, the young woman whispered, her voice tight with panic. I didn't even know my boyfriend wasn't human until the baby was born. Now she glows when she's happy and makes plants grow when she cries, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Elena's heart clenched with familiar sympathy. She'd been there, overwhelmed and unprepared for a supernatural child, terrified of making the wrong choices. "You're doing fine," Elena said gently, guiding the mother to one of the comfortable chairs in the family counseling area. "The glow is normal. Fae babies often emit light when they're content. It's actually a good sign. And the plant growth thing will level out as she gets older and learns to control her magic. But what if someone notices? What if? Then you bring her here," Elena said firmly. "Every Tuesday and Thursday we have mixed family support groups. Human parents with supernatural children, supernatural parents with human children, and everything in between. You're not alone in this." The young mother's eyes filled with tears. "Really? There are others." "So many others," Elena assured her. "Sarah, can you grab the resource packet from my desk? The one labeled New Fae Families?" Sarah appeared with the requested packet, along with a cup of chamomile tea for the frazzled mother and a soft blanket for the glowing baby. At 21, Sarah had grown into her role as the bridge between the human and supernatural worlds with remarkable grace. She was finishing her pre-med degree while simultaneously studying supernatural biology with pack healers, determined to become the kind of doctor who could treat patients regardless of their species. "Hi," Sarah said to the baby, who immediately stopped glowing and stared at her with wide, curious eyes. "I'm Sarah. I was adopted by werewolves, so I know all about growing up in mixed families. It's pretty great, actually." The baby gurgled happily and reached for Sarah's finger with tiny hands that sparkled with residual magic. "See," Elena said to the mother, who was watching the interaction with wonder. "You're going to be fine. Your daughter is going to be fine. And if you need anything at all, you call the emergency number in that packet. Someone will answer day or night." The mother nodded tearfully, clutching the resource packet like a lifeline. Elena made a mental note to assign her one of the veteran mixed family volunteers and schedule a follow-up appointment for the following week. "Elena," Magnus' voice carried across the room, warm with amusement, "your 11 o'clock is here." Elena looked up to see her most challenging client approaching, Mrs. Hendricks, an 87-year-old werewolf who had been hiding her supernatural nature from her human great-grandchildren for 60 years and was now having what could only be described as an identity crisis. "Mrs. Hendricks," Elena said, standing to greet the elderly woman, "how are you feeling today?" "Tired of pretending to be decrepit when I could arm wrestle my great-grandson and win," Mrs. Hendricks replied tartly. "Also, I may have accidentally shifted partially during my bridge game yesterday and had to convince the other ladies that my improved eyesight was due to new prescription glasses." Elena bit back a smile. "And how did that go?" "They're now all demanding to know my optometrist's name because they want the same miracle glasses that let me read the fine print on the cards from across the table." "We'll work on your control exercises today," Elena promised, leading Mrs. Hendricks toward her office. "And maybe discuss some strategies for gradual revelation to your family." As they walked, Elena caught sight of Magnus in the main room, surrounded by a group of teenage werewolves who were hanging on his every word as he explained something about pack hierarchy and leadership responsibilities. At 67, he'd grown into the role of Elder Alpha with surprising grace, mentoring young wolves while gradually passing day-to-day pack management to the next generation. He caught her eye and smiled, the same smile that had made her throw a bedpan at him 3 years ago. "Something's never changed." "Elena," Mrs. Hendricks said as they settled into the counseling office, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How do you do it? Balance being Elena Santos the nurse with Eleanor Blackthorne the Luna, with just being Elena the woman? Because I've been trying to figure out how to be Dorothy Hendricks the sweet old lady and Dorothy Hendricks the werewolf matriarch, and I feel like I'm losing my mind." Elena considered the question, one she'd wrestled with for years. "I think," she said slowly, "the secret is realizing they're not separate people. Elena Santos and Eleanor Blackthorne aren't two different women I have to choose between. They're two aspects of the same person. The nurse and the Luna, the caregiver and the pack mother, the woman who throws bedpans at difficult patients and the woman who transforms under the full moon. They're all me." Mrs. Hendricks nodded thoughtfully. "And the integration doesn't drive you crazy?" "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "But I have help. I have Magnus, who loves all my contradictions. I have Sarah, who keeps me grounded in both worlds. I have the pack, who accept that their Luna is also a working nurse with a mortgage and a tendency to solve problems with medical equipment. And if they didn't accept it?" Elena's smile was sharp with hard-won confidence. "Then they wouldn't be my pack. They spent the next hour working through Mrs. Hendrick's strategies for gradual supernatural revelation, role-playing conversations with family members, and practicing control exercises that would help her maintain her human facade when necessary. When the session ended, Elena walked her client out to find the community center in full swing. The medical wing was bustling with parents bringing children for checkups. The main room hosted a support group for supernatural veterans dealing with PTSD, and the children's area was full of young werewolves, half-fae, and human siblings playing together under Sarah's watchful eye. "Luna Elena," a familiar voice called, and Elena turned to see Caleb approaching with a tablet and the expression that meant he was about to ask her to make an executive decision about something. "Just Elena, Caleb," she corrected automatically. "What's the crisis?" "No crisis, just a request. The Portland PAC has asked if we'd be willing to host a mixed family conference next month. Apparently, word has spread about our community center and the work you're doing here." Elena raised an eyebrow. "How many people are we talking about? Maybe 300? From 6 different PACs across the Northwest, plus their human family members and allies." Elena's first instinct was to panic. 300 people was a far cry from their usual group of 50 to 60 community members. But then she looked around the center, taking in the smooth integration of human and supernatural families, the easy way her medical staff handled everything from werewolf cubs to fae babies to perfectly ordinary human children. "We can do it," she said, surprising herself. "We'll need more volunteers, expanded medical facilities for that many people, and probably a bigger venue for some of the events. But we can do it." Caleb's face lit up. "Magnus thought you'd say that. He's already started looking into renting the convention center for the larger gatherings." Elena shook her head, amused despite herself. "Of course he has." "Elena," Sarah called from across the room. "Can you settle a debate? Marcus thinks werewolf healing abilities mean they don't need vaccines, but I'm trying to explain that supernatural immunity doesn't work that way. Vaccines work on different principles than natural immunity." Elena called back, then looked at Caleb. "Schedule a vaccination clinic for next week. And add a session on supernatural biology and modern medicine to the conference agenda." Caleb made notes on his tablet. "Anything else? Ask Dr. Martinez if she knows any other human medical professionals who might be interested in supernatural community outreach. We're going to need more people." As Caleb hurried off to make arrangements, Elena felt a pair of familiar arms wrap around her waist from behind. "Planning another impossible project?" Magnus murmured against her ear. "Apparently," Elena said, leaning back against his chest. 300 people, Magnus. What have I gotten myself into?" "Something amazing," he said simply. "Something that's going to help hundreds of families figure out how to navigate between two worlds, just like you did." Elena turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had waited 34 years for her to figure out who she was. "You know I'm going to be completely impossible to live with for the next month, right? I'll be obsessing over every detail, micromanaging the volunteers, and probably having nightmares about logistical disasters." Magnus' grin was pure adoration. "I'm counting on it. I love watching you take on the world and win." "I don't always win." "You do," he corrected. "Maybe not the way you originally planned, but you always find a way to make things work. That's why you're perfect for this job, Elena. That's why the community needs you." Elena looked around the bustling center, at Mrs. Hendricks chatting with other elderly PAC members about the challenges of aging as a supernatural, at Sarah teaching a group of teenagers about college applications while casually discussing the pros and cons of different pre-med programs for students with enhanced senses, at dozens of families who had found a place where they belonged exactly as they were. "You know what?" she said, standing on her toes to kiss Magnus softly. "I think you might be right. Does this mean you'll finally say yes when I propose next Friday?" Elena pretended to consider this. "Ask me Friday and find out." Magnus laughed, the sound rich and warm and full of endless patience. "Every Friday for the rest of our lives, if that's what it takes." "Every Friday," Elena confirmed, then paused. "Though I should probably warn you, if you're planning something elaborate for the proposal, you might want to consider that I'll be in the middle of conference planning. So nothing that requires me to be romantic or graceful or—" "Elena," Magnus interrupted gently, "after everything we've been through, do you really think I care about elaborate proposals? I just want you to say yes when you're ready." Elena felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest, the feeling that had taken her 52 years to recognize as coming home. "Magnus." "Yes. Ask me now." Magnus went very still. "Now. Right now." Here, surrounded by our community, our family, all the impossible things we've built together. Ask me now. Magnus didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the bustling community center, pulling out a simple gold band that Elena somehow knew had been in his pocket every Friday for the past 2 years. Elena Santos Blackthorne, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. Will you marry me? Will you be my mate, my partner, my Luna, and my impossible, wonderful wife for whatever time we have left in this life? Elena looked down at him, this powerful, patient, ridiculously dramatic man who had loved her through memory loss and identity crises and more chaos than any reasonable person should have to endure. Then she looked around the room at the faces of people who had become their chosen family, all of them waiting with hopeful expressions for her answer. Yes, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, you impossible, wonderful, dramatic disaster of a man. I'll marry you. The cheer that went up from the community center probably violated several noise ordinances, but Elena didn't care. She was too busy being kissed by her fiancé while their daughter hooped with joy and 30 werewolves howled their approval, and Mrs. Hendricks shouted that it was about damn time. Later, after the celebration had died down and the last of the community members had gone home, Elena found herself alone in her office, updating client files and thinking about how much her life had changed. 3 years ago, she'd been Elena Santos, overworked nurse drowning in debt and loneliness. Now she was Elena Santos Blackthorne, engaged to the love of her life, mother to a brilliant daughter, Luna to a pack that had become her chosen family, and director of a community center that served both human and supernatural families. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she was 20 and running scared from her destiny. It wasn't even the life she'd imagined when she was 49 and throwing bedpans at difficult patients. But it was perfect. It was complicated and chaotic and full of impossible challenges and supernatural drama. It required her to be a nurse and a Luna, a mother and a mate, a bridge between two worlds that didn't always understand each other. It was exactly who she was meant to be. Elena Santos Blackthorne, who had finally learned that running toward love was so much better than running away from it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Magnus. Dinner in 20 minutes. I'm making your favorite. Also, I love you. Also, I still can't figure out how to make the crying laughing emoji work properly, so please imagine I sent you 17 of them. Elena laughed, typing back. I love you too. And Magnus. Yes. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for coming home. Elena looked around her office one more time, at the photos of Sarah's college graduation, at the thank you cards from families she'd helped, at the framed picture of her and Magnus on their first official date, and felt that familiar sense of rightness settle over her. She was exactly where she belonged. Finally, the end. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share, and subscribe for more.